Hellraiser, a re-envisioning of things. Horror movies occupy a special place in Winterwolf's heart. Many informative weekend nights as a preteen was spent catching horror movie marathons on cable. That's what we boomer types used to watch before you lot came along with your fancy newfangled streaming services and YouTubes and TalkTicks and all the other kind of things that you watch your shit on. But back then, that's what we had. Now, horror movies are great. There's nothing quite like them as far as movies go. You got cheap thrills, you got jump scares, you got lasting psychological traumas, you've got slashers, you got nature running amok, demonic possession, classic monster flicks, you got it all. It's a genre that dates back to the dawn of man, when our thick-skulled ancestors were doing shadow puppets around the campfire, hoping to impress hot cave tale. Now, Hellraiser has always been something of an oddity among its horror siblings. And despite appealing to a slim niche of horror fans given the weird BDSM, masochistic subject matter, people the world over still know and recognize Pinhead. Frankly, they love him. He's recognized everywhere, nearly almost as iconic as Freddy Krueger or that one hockey mask-wearing dickhead who's got a thing for depraved teens with morality issues. But despite the iconic look, Hellraiser, as a complete franchise, has always kind of sat squarely on my B tier of horror movie franchises, along with other favorites like Children of the Corn, Child's Play, and Pumpkinhead. It never really broke into like the big three of Freddy, Michael, or Jason. The Hellraiser film franchise first arrived on the big screen way back in '87. That's 1987 for you younger types. And went on to spawn 8 sequels featuring a split of theatrical and home video offerings. The franchise went on hiatus for a bit, and then was ultimately rebooted in 2018 with Hellraiser Judgment, which showed up with mixed to negative reception from the fans, with the major complaint being the lack of Doug Bradley, who sat that one out and did not reprise the role of iconic Pinhead. But as Hollywood is typically bereft of new ideas and more risk-adverse than a person in 2022 that's quadruple boosted and still wearing a pair of masks around their own home, they've decided to take, finally, another crack at a Hellraiser franchise. Enter Hellraiser 2022. And side note, the only thing worse than a reboot in theory is a reboot that can't be bothered to come up with an original or differentiating title. I fucking hate that. Video games do this, movies do this. Guys, just come up with a new name. Just call it Hellraiser Reborn and we'd have been straight. Anyway, Hellraiser 2022 is a straight-to-streaming release on Hulu, courtesy of the Spyglass Media Group. So, given that I'm a sucker for getting the most out of the 600 streaming services that I have, and being the generous type when it comes to horror flicks, I decided that this Halloween I'd be taking a look. Especially after seeing the trailer, which did get me to raise an eyebrow and think that it could hold a candle to some of the lesser sequels, but I wanted to see if it could punch up a class or two and take on the original two, which were by far the best in the series. Now, just for the record, I am going to be judging this one on its own merits. There are significant deviations from what most fans will remember from the original films, and in this case, that's okay. It's been said by fans of the original novel that inspired the film franchise that this flick is closer to that original source material penned by Master of Horror himself, Clive Barker. I believe that was called The Hellbound Heart. It's a novella. You guys might want to look into that. You hear it's pretty gruesome. So I might make some general comparisons between the aesthetics of the two films in terms of imagery and music and things like that, but I won't be getting into the deep lore like I might have in another IP, because honestly, I'm not that well versed in the novel or the expanded writings. I understand there's a bunch of graphic novels that have been penned since the mid to late 90s, and some of them are also reportedly very good. That said, here's the general plot, and fair warning, there's probably going to be some spoilers in the mix the deeper I get into this. So if you haven't seen Hellraiser on Hulu just yet, you might want to bounce, and then please, by all means, come back. We'd love to have you check out the review. So we open in a ritzy sort of mansion, in a very ritzy kind of party, where the obvious wrong person in the wrong place at the wrong time is seduced by a mysterious woman into meeting with the current owner of the Lament configuration, Roland Voight. Obvious victim opens and solves the puzzle box, and in doing so gets himself flayed and torn apart by the familiar barb chains that we've all come to know and love from the franchise. Fast forward 6 years, and we meet the actual cast of the movie. Riley is a down-on-her-luck recovering drug addict, currently cramping the space of her brother Matt and his roommate Nora. Wanting to avoid any additional judgment from her brother after they argue, Riley agrees to join her boyfriend Trevor on a little breaking and entering job, hoping to score enough to be able to move out, get her own place, and live judgment-free. Their target is a warehouse owned by a mysterious billionaire that Trevor proposes as an easy mark with minimal security and minimal risk. They wind up with the score of a lifetime. taking ownership of a mysterious artifact, the likes of which neither of them have ever seen. Enter the Lament configuration. And soon after a final argument regarding Riley's drinking and drug use that gets herself evicted from her brother Matt's apartment, Riley finds herself high and in a playground, kind of spinning around on one of those doodling little merry-go-round things that usually slingshot kids off of at Mach 2, which are super fun. She's hanging on to the puzzle box. As the drugs kick in, Riley sees blurred images of the Cenobites and starts hearing voices calling out for her. Fortunately, White Knight and Big Brother Matt comes outside to find her. Sadly, he's accidentally cut by the box's hidden blade and himself is confronted by the Cenobites.
It's a bitch, ain't it?
When Riley finally comes to, Matt's gone, and now she's got both a mystery to solve and a world of regret to deal with. So that's the plot in a nutshell to Hellraiser 2022. You guys, this is where the movie does a lot of things that are really cool and really new, but unfortunately falls into some of the typical kind of pitfalls that I think a lot of horror movies find themselves getting into now. They go far and play easy with some of the old lore, which is fine because, like I said, I'm not an expert, and they do a lot of nifty new things. They do some creative shit, but they don't go far enough in terms of exploring like the depth and meaning that the way the original movie did. Now, the original movie always kind of had that rap for being really weird with like the bondage, the BDSM, the sadomasochistic aspect of what the Cenobites represented in that film universe. But here it's a little bit different. And where it differentiates here is that the puzzle box itself, and this is one of the cooler things about Hellraiser 2022, the Lament configuration, as we've always known it as the puzzle box, the regular 6-sided cube. It's different now, and it's only one configuration out of 6 or 7. And I'll have a screenshot up here for you guys in a second. Here we go. And basically each of these forms, if you can get it to unlock to that point, if you get it to unlock through all the forms that end on the Leviathan configuration, you score yourself a meeting with the Dark God that kind of runs the Cenobites and runs a certain subsection of hell, and it's able to grant you a gift. So it's kind of different than how the original movie just kind of focused on more aspects of like lust and desire and got bad people to do bad things, and then kind of they phrased it as always just showing them like the extra delights of existence, but it was obviously just pain, death, and torture, for all eternity and damnation, that kind of thing. So it deviates a little bit there. The new configurations are really cool. They twist the box in all kinds of odd shapes, and what happens is it's kind of a built-in challenge, and you have to get the box to morph through all the different forms while avoid being cut by like this little blade that just kind of springs out from the side. And if it cuts you, you get a little drugged up. The Cenobites enter our world through like, reality shifting, doors opening, walls opening kind of stuff that felt right at home from some of the older movies. So it wasn't necessarily a tie-in, but I did like them using some of that old kind of imagery. That was definitely pretty cool. So what the bad guys in the flick typically have done through the history they show you is the owner of the box kind of gets 6 or 7 other people to get the box wrong, solve the puzzle but not avoid the blade, get cut, and then they're the ones that end up getting sacrificed to the Cenobites when they show up. So that's kind of a major deviation here, where in the original bunch of films as I remember them, the people that opened the box were always a-holes. Even if they were tricked into open it, they were doing something wrong. So it was like a built-in kind of morality tale to it, is you could be conned into opening it and then you yourself were punished and somebody else could benefit from it. Here, as we get into the movie, we see a few different people who are completely innocent victims by all account, absolutely butchered by the Cenobites after they get cut by the blade on the box. And a couple people, the box is actually wielded like a weapon, where like somebody kind of just bludgeons you with it, nicks you with the blade, and then you're the one that gets up getting dragged to hell. So that's a kind of a big difference between how both of these movies play. So that in and of itself was an interesting change. Like I said earlier, the imagery here is good. It's very dark and somber. It definitely takes itself seriously, which is nice. There's not a lot of campiness going on with it. It does try to kind of stick the landing in terms of being kind of bleak and kind of not mean-spirited, but it's harsh. It's a harsh movie world to be in. And as the innocents find out throughout the film, it's like just because you didn't have anything to do with opening the box doesn't mean that you can't be boned into dealing with the consequences of it opening. And I'll extend that same kind of admiration for this film and just kind of respecting some of the source material where they kept the score the same. So the music is on point. It's got that same It's kind of like a deep bell chiming theme. You guys can check it out on YouTube and hear it if you're not familiar with the franchise. But it's pretty iconic. It's right up there with like some, Psycho and some of the, the sound effects from Friday the 13th, or the the Freddy Krueger theme, and even the Jaws theme and things like that. This one's up there for me. So they definitely hit it on that. The Cenobite design, it's kind of, everything's been re-envisioned. They've moved away from like the pleather and the vinyl and the skin tight leather, and relied more on everything. It's just kind of like a flayed flesh kind of thing. There's just strips of flesh that are missing, and then pins and spikes and zippers, and flayed skin is kind of pulled off of throats, and all kinds of weird stuff. There's 3 Cenobites that we see. They bring back classic Chatterer, of course, and then they've got a couple of new ones they're kind of gruesome in their designs. They're effective, so I did kind of like that stuff. That all worked for me, definitely. The new Pinhead, played by I believe her name is Jamie Clayton, replacing Doug Bradley in the iconic role as Pinhead, or Hell's Priest. I understand that her version is a little bit closer to the source material, so I'll give them a pass on the gender swap on this one. The creature design is okay. I would have liked it if everything was a little bit darker, because when you show up with kind of like flayed flesh, but it's light skinned in a brighter lighting, it just kind of looks kind of rubbery. So it didn't completely sell me on the design there, but her performance was great. The modulated voice was a little odd. I feel like it was a missed opportunity on that. They made her sound a little bit too much like Doug Bradley, where the original kind of text description of her voice is something more akin to like an overexcited teenage girl kind of thing. And I think they could have played into that with getting that to be kind of modulated and warbly. It could have been a brand new creepy aesthetic they could have brought to it, but I think they were probably just trying to show homage to Doug's voice, and it'll probably work for most people. But if they were going to do the stick with the source material stuff, that would have been a place they really could have nailed down their own vibe for the film. So that would work too. There's a lot of stuff to like in the movie in terms of all these good things. Sadly, there are a couple of things that don't work, and I'm gonna nail those down real quick. The movie is drawn out, in my opinion. It runs, I think it was 2 hours and change, which is about 30 minutes too long for most horror flicks, especially when they tend to run into some of the familiar pitfalls of these movies, where things get a little formulaic and they play by all the rules, they cover all their bases, but they really don't break any new ground. Case in point for this one, there's a scene where during the kind of the research phase, when unknowns come up against the supernatural, they try to do the local investigation into the library in the old days, and now they just break out the Google foo and they check shit out. So after they do their Google foo here, they try and find somebody that worked with the original owner of or the most recent owner that they could find of the lament configuration. They find her kind of in like an insane asylum. They go in, they walk in, they visit with her, and one thing leads to another, and the old lady gets herself cut by the box, and then Cenobites show up for her. That whole sequence plays out as completely unnecessary and kind of breaks down into like typical slasher fare, where she's kind of running around a pseudo surreal dream world, where all of a sudden she no longer needs her wheelchair or the oxygen that she's on. She's kind of evading the Cenobites trying to get out of the asylum. But every left turn just kind of brings her into like the same room that she just left, kind of thing. So it was kind of unnecessary. We didn't really need to see any of that. The performances are hit and miss, unfortunately. I think the lead was okay in parts, but anytime she was interacting on like an agitated like anger kind of on that side of the spectrum of things, it gets a little melodramatic. Like she kind of oversells it. In particular, the argument she has with her brother at the beginning, they come across very CW, and it was kind of a low point there. Like I mentioned before, the actress playing the priest, or Pinhead, was pretty good. The character, I think his name was Colin, was the lead's brother's boyfriend. Colin was pretty good. The main villain in the movie, who's not the priest, because the priest is never the villain, it's always some dickhead human. The character's name was Roland Voight. He was pretty good. He bordered on kind of a weird Willem Dafoe kind of like manic-y kind of thing near the end. Like, he gave me vibes of him. Maybe he just looked like him. He wasn't that manic, I don't know. But they played a couple of plot twists, and he's involved in one of them there. I think my big takeaway after watching it, though, is while I appreciate the change in the lore, I don't like that innocent victims are now allowed. mean, even as far back as some of their campier ones like Hellraiser 3, where like people are getting slaughtered en masse by the end of the movie. I think that the people that end up dying at the end of that flick, they were all in on doing something wrong on some level, so their deaths are kind of justified in the terms of how horror movies typically play out like morality tales. But in this one here, like the main character, Riley, her friends, her brother, they get butchered for having done nothing wrong, and that doesn't really sit right with me, because I like when horror movies have the morality tale aspect to it. You know, I like the kids at the summer camp, you know, if they're smoking and drinking and doing drugs and fucking around, Jason's gonna find them. Like, I like that old urban legend, babysitter, the killer's upstairs morality tale vibe. And it makes me sad, because I wonder if, you know, we don't do that in horror movies anymore, because society has kind of become so, you know, morally relative, you know, so morally ambiguous that we don't think like that anymore, and that now we're just okay with innocents being slaughtered due to circumstances outside their control. Riley's friend Nora gets the worst of it as far as I'm concerned, in terms of how the Cenobites eventually completely dismantle her. Some gruesome effects work go down there, and I won't spoil that part. So I think if you guys watch it when it comes up, you'll dig that vibe. The protagonist herself, not very likable. She doesn't really do anything endearing at any point that makes you kind of feel for her. Like, every bad thing that happens in the movie is kind of her fault. Like, everything that she involves herself with is just a bad decision, which is kind of part and parcel for Hellraiser, so it's not like it's unfamiliar ground. But usually those characters balance it a little bit with something that they do that makes you kind of endear to them, but that's not really how it goes down for Riley in this flick, unfortunately. We do have a couple of twists that come through. One of them is kind of a telegraph from really early on in the beginning. Spoiler alert, her boyfriend Trevor is in on it. He is on the payroll for Roland Voight, who basically needs like a 7th victim to open the box, because he wants a second crack at meeting Leviathan, because he's not satisfied with the first gift he got, which is another interesting deviation from the lore. And I don't want to spoil that either, but it does run itself into some challenges with maintaining its own logic within the film. Like, the Cenobites left him alive with a gift, you know, that didn't wind up killing him. The box, you know, it obtains its 7th victim while it's in Riley's possession, so she's given a choice for a gift at the end, but then simultaneously Voight's also given a choice for a second gift. So I didn't really understand the internals of that, so I kind of scratching my head about that. But, you know, he gets his. She makes an interesting decision of which choice she could make. You know, I'll put up the graphic again here for you guys to see. She chooses oddly, but it's in line with knowing how to play the genie in his own game. Like, you know, you can't wish for, you know, a million wishes. You can't ever do the monkey paw thing where you wish for somebody to come back because they never come back how you want. There's some Pet Cemetery shit, like sometimes dead is better. So she makes an inspired choice, and I won't knock her for it. The movie ends with a little bit of a mid-credit stinger, a little bit. You get a look at what could be the possible future for one of the characters who didn't make it, and how that could impact the larger lore. So there's some interesting stuff to build on here. So overall, guys, if I had to score this one, I'd probably give it probably a 6.5, maybe a 7 out of 10. It has its ups and downs. There's a lot of really interesting deviations from the stuff I grew up with in terms of the lore, stuff that I'd like to see them develop on. I really wouldn't want to see the actress here come back to reprise the role of Riley. I'm sorry, I don't remember her name. I'm not even going to try and guess at it because I really don't remember what it was. I wouldn't really like seeing the main lead or most of the cast from this one come back at all, besides probably Jamie Clayton as the new Hell Priest. She's fine. I didn't really feel for the main character in this one, the main female lead, Riley, the same way I kind of liked Ashley Lawrence's Christy, but again, that's probably because it's when I was coming up when I was younger and, you know, had a diehard crush on her anyway back then. But they do well to just recast this and move on, continue to expand the lore. So I think that's it for me on this one, guys. Final score, 6.5, maybe 7 out of 10. Enough likes, enough dislikes. I'll probably never watch this one again. It's nothing that I'll sit down for every Halloween. But I'm not upset that I watched it. I am upset that it dragged a little bit in the middle, but, you know, not a fatal flaw for me by any means. That's all I got on this one, guys. Thanks for checking us out. Sub to the channel. I'd like to review more horror flicks as I go forward through the holiday season, through Halloween at the very least. Anyway, maybe not the whole holidays. So, you know, sub to the channel, like the vid. Points of criticism are always welcome. Comment below if you like. Did you guys watch Hellraiser 2022? Did you like or dislike? Did you want Doug Bradley back? Do they need to put this one to bed for a while? Let me know. I'll get back to you in the next one.